This is TWiT.
We're doing country tour, right? Like I did a bunch of Scottish towards the end of the year last year when I got stuck in Balvenie and Glenfiddich.
Oh, yeah.
And then I thought, we got to give the Americans a break. So and I'd gotten a bottle of Elijah Craig over Christmas, which is gone now. And the Bareface is still upstairs, but it's been doing well in cocktails. Writer's Tears, I didn't buy for that particular case, but I felt like, we've done English, we've done the Scottish and the American and the Irish, and so we should do Irish as well and the Canadian. So it's time for Japan. And I realized I've only ever been to Japan one other time. It was episode 826 when I did sort of the overall discussion of what makes Japanese whiskey distinct. And of course, and then we landed on this really unusual whiskey, the Ohashi, the whiskey sherry cask, which is made with rice. They use the shoju process to make whiskey because Japan now has a standardization for whiskey that's taken years. It really only fully came into effect in 2021, where their whiskey needs to be a spirit that's fermented, distilled, and aged in Japan. It must use grain, but it can be any kind of grain, including rice. And we have to use Japanese water, which is an interesting specification. Like, what's the alternative? But okay. And at least 3 years in casks. They also limited the size to 700 liters, which is a pretty big barrel, but not the biggest. That certain classes of large barrel, like certain port barrels and so forth, that get really huge, they couldn't be using. Can't over distill, can't go above 95%, which is still high. Can't go below 40%, needs to be bottled in Japan. And those rules mean it's Japanese whiskey, but then they immediately created a category called world whiskey, which allows you to work around that problem. And many of the major distilleries make a world whiskey on top of making Japanese whiskey. I was going to talk about Suntory, which is literally named for its founder, which is Tori Shinjiro, so that Tori with two eyes, they turned it to Suntory, who is the originator for Yamazaki. Arguably the first whiskey in Japan. And there's always people talk about that. And we talked about this in 826, back that older show where Takashiro Masataka, who had done his training in Scotland, joined with Tori to make the Yamazaki distillery. And after a certain amount, I think it was 10 years, he's like, okay, that's enough for me. I'm going to go do my own. I disagree with you a bunch of stuff. And that became Nikkei, another major Japanese distillery. And by the way, there are many more now. This was in the 30s and through World War II and into the harder times of whiskey. But today, when whiskey is so hip,
this, by the way, is fully described in your episode of your the whiskey creation process, Japanese whiskey creation. And
that was probably episode 826. The most familiar, popular Japanese whiskey, or I feel like this is the one I see the most often.
Yamazaki is, right?
Well, and Hibiki especially.
Oh, yeah. Hibiki. Okay, let's go.
Hibiki is made by Suntory as well. But, I mean, when you talk Suntory, we know because of Lost in Translation, right? 2003.
Yeah, that's right.
And that, all of that. It's Suntory time, which, by the way, in the story, what Bob is promoting is Hibiki 17.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, which is okay. That makes sense. I've been meaning to rewatch that movie ever since you mentioned it before. Actually,
such a good movie.
It's a great movie, and a very young Scarlett Johansson, and in her underwear for some reason, which I thought served no purpose. Like,
nobody's complaining. What do you mean?
Worst things in this world. Interesting that movie came out in 2003, which was the same year that Yamazaki 12 won the gold medal at the International Spirits Challenge. Which was the first time a Japanese whiskey had ever won an international challenge.
Bill Murray effect.
Something like that, except it literally was the same year. What I find interesting when you really study that particular whiskey was, they laid that up in 1991, like literally in the middle of the Japanese financial crisis.
Wow.
Was when that stuff was going into barrels, that winning whiskey. And it may, it's easy to hate on a company like Suntory. I mean, they're now called Beam Suntory because they bought Jim Beam as well, and they own Ben Nevis, and it's a massive multinational conglomerate with the parent holding company in Osaka. But through those difficult times, like when whiskey didn't sell well in the 80s, they never stopped making single malts. They just didn't make very much of it. So they were funding it on the back of Suntory whiskey. Like when you talk about what did Suntory originally make, like back in the 30s, they weren't making single malts. That wasn't even a thing, right? We don't get the term single malt as a product until the 1960s. They were making whiskey, Suntory whiskey, right? A whiskey that we generally know of as, I wrote the name down here and it got away from me. But they don't even sell it outside of Asia or Japan. And they do distinguish the difference between Asia and Japan because that's sort of the way they work. And by the way, if you want to try and find that Hibiki 17, like the Yamazaki 12 that won the award in 2003, you can still get a Yamazaki 12. I was originally I was going to say this is the whiskey to talk about today. But it's bloody hard to get, and it's $200, and it's a $40 whiskey. To be clear, It is a $40. It was $40 before it won the award. It should still be $40, but it's $200. And that Hibiki 17, which they stopped making in 2018, I was searching the rare whiskey sites to try and see if I could actually get a bottle of it. $700+ for a blended whiskey. Like, okay. And the Yamazaki 12 is very much a classic Scottish style whiskey made in Japan. It is purely malted barley, twice distilled, right? That's super conventional. They age in ex-bourbon casks, sherry casks, and Minunara oak casks. Now, we talked about that on the Japanese show as well. There is an oak from Japan. It's not good at making barrels, so it's expensive because it doesn't grow really long and straight like French oak does. But it does have its own unique flavor. A flavor literally is often coined as Japanese. So while 2003 was the first time that Suntory won these awards for Yamazaki, there are other distilleries like Hibiki and Hakushu have won many awards since. They are now just a major player in the world. They've won Distiller of the Year a few times. Like, it's a big deal. And Hibiki is also a very old whiskey. In some ways, it's older than a lot of the Yamazaki institutions because it is a blended whiskey, and blended whiskeys are simply easier to make. You take all of your specialty whiskeys and you combine that maybe don't sell it well. You combine together something that tastes good and you sell it, and it costs less to do that, right? And one of the examples, if you look over in Scotland, is the Glenturret, a distillery you've never heard of, and their single malts not impressive, but it's the same company that makes Famous Grouse, right? Which is a grain whiskey that has Highland Park and Macallan in it. That's how they do their thing, right? And so the fact that they've kept all these different styles under one house is one of the things that makes Suntory so resilient. And again, easy to hate on this company, but you remember that cool Maker's Mark small batch we had? That's because of Suntory, right? Suntory bought Maker's Mark and said, "Hey, you're not doing any rare, weird versions of your whiskey, and they make a lot of money. Go to it." And it was great. It was expensive.
You've given me a story that I've told several times now. This is probably my most retold Richard story
of finding that special edition Maker's Mark.
I love it. I just love it because they're like, no, that's like, I just love they came in like, no, you're doing this thing, and now it's the biggest thing in the world.
Yeah, and that's the way it goes. So Hibiki has been made since the 80s. In fact, the original edition was from 1989, which was to commemorate Suntory's 90th anniversary, going back to the 1890s. Today, you can get a 100th anniversary edition of a blended whiskey for more than $100. If that inclines you, I think the Blossom edition is almost $200. And they use a lot of different whiskeys because they make so many. They're all Suntory whiskeys. So the major distilleries, Yamazaki, Hakushu, Chita, those are all involved. They have different barrelings. One of the barrelings that they use, and I've seen the special edition of this in the Hakushu distillery, they actually sell this as a separate single malt, is aged in umushu casks. And umushu is a Japanese plum liqueur. So they make grain alcohol, and then they soak these green underripe plums with sugar in them and make a kind of liqueur, and they age them in wood. And they now have been putting whiskey into those barrels for a certain amount of time, and then it imparts its own flavor. And the sort of traditional Hibiki Harmony, which was the replacement for their age appellated versions like Hibiki 17 blended, and there was a 21 as well, all of which are now off the market. The Harmony just means they don't put an age on it for a reason. There's some 5 and 6 year old in there, guaranteed. And nobody wants to buy that. So it's Harmony. The Harmony is, it costs us less to make this good tasting thing.
Not the harmony between the ages of the ingredients.
And that being said, Hibiki Harmony is disturbingly difficult to find. It is easier to find than most. You'll have to go into your liquor store. It is not always stocked. And it is selling for $100, which is a lot for a blended whiskey. It's good. Is it $100 good? That's tough. You know, 40, this is a grabber. Like, you should have this on your shelf all the time. But at 100, it's a lot for a blended whiskey. 43%. Again, it's a blend, so it's got its own niceties to it. Like, for me, my go-to blend, there's a couple of go-to blends that I keep on the shelf all the time. The Dewar's 12. I will always drink a Chivas as it's around, especially their 12. Famous Grouse. Right? Those are my usual go-to blends. And Hibiki Harmony used to be, just not at $100. But there are inexpensive Japanese whiskeys. They're just not from any distiller you've ever heard of. Like, all of the known brands now have upscaled to the point where it's $100 plus bottles of whiskey.
Is this accessible in the US? Like
the Hibiki Harmony?
No, the other Japanese.
The other way, yes. They're starting to show up more and more.
Yeah.
In fact, and I think, like, you go to a Total Wine or a Bevmo or any of those kinds of sites and you search for Hibiki, they're going to throw a whole bunch of other whiskeys that they have at you for $40 and $50.
Because they know you're looking,
because you're looking for Japanese. So like, you like that because you heard that name. Let me show you something that we actually have.
Mm-hmm.
Because they often don't have this one, but you will find it. This one I still find around. This one is often on the bar. If you got a nice whiskey collection, you'll have a Harmony before you have any Yamazakis of any kind.
I have what I call a temporary whiskey collection.
All whiskey is temporary. You're doing it right.
Yeah.
Now I've got, with this new office, I've got the decanter out. There's Chivas Regal in it at the moment.
That's a good one. That way, you don't have to advertise it. If somebody wants a glass, you pour it. They're happy.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, the use of a decanter is something you should possibly talk about at some point.
Yeah, I got a nice decanter and glass set for Christmas a few years ago. It's bohemian, and so it's a shame not to use it. Right?
I have an empty Louis XIII. Remy Martin brandy bottle. That would make a nice decanter for something.
It would make a nice decanter.
It's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
But Lisa is a fan of really old Madeiras. She just got a few bottles of like 1968 Madeira. And I said, good, we'll put it in a decanter. We'll have the little glasses and the tray. She says, no. No. I'm gonna, she uses a Coravan and she says, I said, but it's already fortified. Yeah. You don't have to worry about it. She says, no. So, but I like the decanter. It's hospitality.
Well, that's her thing.
Yeah. It's attractive. Like, it's
pretty. You bring it out, people come and you pour it. They don't see the label. It's not about the label. It's about having a fine.
Well, and obviously decanters exist because once upon a time you had to get your whiskey from barrels. And so, and that's my running joke. It's like you send your servant down to fill it.
Yes.
You're filtering out the wood chips.
Yeah. But and bottles used to be very plain because bottles were expensive. So putting a decanter was nice. But today, like, I'm still in awe of that Bareface bottle with the slashes in it.
Oh, I love that.
Through the label.
Yeah,
so
that was really
actually like this Hibiki Harmony.
That's an attractive bottle.
It looks like a decanter.
It really is.
It's got a glass stopper. It's very nice. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it is an attractive bottle. And for
is it $100 nice or $45 nice?
Well, when they start making bottles this nice, you got to know they're charging too much for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like the Louis XIII. It's like a Lalique crystal bottle.
Sure. That's what got me with that Bareface. That's a $40 bottle of Canadian whiskey, and it's got a gorgeous bottle.
Yeah.
Or the Pendleton Rye. That Pendleton Rye bottle is
I'm still trying to find that, by the way.
Just remember, you don't drink the bottle.
No, but you do admire it.
I'm going out tomorrow up to the, as we call it, the area, the big liquor store. and Pendleton is on my list. That's one of the things I'm going to try to find.
And I definitely, living up on the coast now, there's lots of places where I can get a Johnny Walker. And there's only one bigger liquor store down in, quote, the city in Seashell, which is a town of 10,000 people.
It helps to know that inexpensive, whiskey can be good, and that you could walk in a place and you order, like, I'll order a Manhattan. They're like, "Is Maker's Mark good?" I'm like, "Yep, it's fine. That's absolutely
Mark
fine.
Is great.
It's perfect. Yep, it's great."
But
and everyone has it.
Is it that really though, Richard? You just don't like the Japanese style that much? That's why you downgrade it?
I mean, I do find Japanese clinical in general, but I often like that too. My problem is the brands that have worked hard to be great have now gotten rid of all their reasonably priced product.
You're talking about as a kind of not to generalize the entire island or whatever, but they've studied whiskey and they're like, we're going to do this exactly right. And in that sense, they're not really innovating per se. They're just trying to come in at some preordained
I mean, I would argue that Suntory's past that now with them blending across, like bringing Ben Nevis into some of their versions of Yamazaki. Like they are doing remarkable things. And that's one of the themes I wanted out of this particular story was like, as much as I haven't got a lot great to say about Diageo either, right? Or Pernod Ricard or any of these large, booze companies. That in a lot of ways they're ripping the soul out of it. Like we always love the few standalone distilleries that are left that are still running their own show. The Balvinis of the world, right? At the same time, I think Suntory made Mark better. Full stop.
Yeah, That's the story to me.
Yeah.
That this is a rare example of some giant conglomerate coming in, turning around a mom and pop store and doing something special. So you don't really see that a lot.
And giving them the budget to set up the space for a short run. Right. To that a certain market's going to appeal, but it's going to raise the product overall for doing that. And that's, I think, a very interesting aspect of alcohol. Look, it does not cost $100 to make this blended whiskey. I bet it doesn't cost
$1,000 to make an iPhone either. But that's the.
I wonder if the bottle doesn't cost more than the booze in it. But
it's a nice bottle.
But that would be a nice bottle. That would be good for olive oil. It'd be good for balsamic vinegar.
Well, you buy the bottle and you fill it with some other cheap stuff.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, exactly.
That's what Dvorak told me to do.
Leave it out for
Louis the 13th. He said, just fill it with, go down to he had a brandy.
I have a friend I hide whiskey from.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Literally, I put whiskey away because I know he's just going to suck it down, unthinkingly.
No. I think I showed you this, Paul. It's like I have 3 tiers of whiskey in the cabinet.
Yeah.
And there's stuff for people that's just drinking stuff. There's stuff. Oh, you like whiskey? Let me show you something interesting. And I usually stick with
you're very interested in whiskey.
Yeah. And I actually like you. Okay. Well, there's a whole other rack.
Nice. Nice. Yep.
I feel like I should like whiskey, but then I also think I don't really want to get that habit.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, start with peanut butter.
Worse habits.
Moving from Screwball, it's kind of a lateral move from there to.
I'm not trying. I got enough problems with Instagram, late night Instagram. I'm not trying to get into anything extra.
What decanter is best for Screwball? It looks like a Mr. Peanut. It's
it would be fun to have a shelf of commemorative whiskey,
or just a peanut butter cup, in crystal. A crystal peanut butter cup. What is this $5,500 charge, Leo? It's a crystal peanut butter cup.
Crystal peanut butter cup. What is? It's what
did it come with peanut butter cups? No, it was empty. You put whiskey in it.
Sure. Yeah. By the way, I just want to point out, Paul, that I did install Arc, and that window is an Arc window floating on my Mac desktop. It's got no.
Oh, look at that.
It's got no.
No adornment whatsoever.
Which I kind of like.
So
it's kind of beautiful.
It must be much further along in the Mac. It's been out. They developed it for. But by the way, here's a fun little fact for you Apple folks out there. Even the Windows version is written in Swift.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, well, crazy. I don't know of any other.
I'll tell you, looking. I was not concerned about running this until Leo pulled it up.
Look
and
how pretty that is, right?
That is beautiful. That is simply beautiful.
Well, all I know is it's Suntory time.
It's always Suntory time.
Richard Campbell, runasradio.com. That's where Run As Radio lives. It's also where .NET Rocks lives. And we do have an entire YouTube playlist of Richard's whiskey talk, which I don't promote enough. I really should mention that more often.
I every so often I said it's like, I took me 2.5 hours to explain Scottish whiskey.
Nice.
Yeah. And so it's divided into nice little chunks, which is good. You don't have to, listen all at once. I think he's done a great job of it. And so,
thank you.
I do too.
Yeah. I don't even know where it lives, to be honest. I don't.
Is it? It's a Club Twit thing, right? Or is it just?
No, it's on Twitter.
It's on YouTube. Let me look. Here's the YouTube page.
It's probably just a playlist off of the normal Twit channel.
Yeah, I guess. I'm trying to see where it's the TWiT Podcast Network. So if you go to youtube.com/twit, there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
youtube.com/twit, you will then see Windows Whisky, which is a playlist that Kevin King did this. A really nice job.
Yeah, Kevin did all the work on this.
Yeah, took all of the little bits from all of the shows, 23 of them.
I like it.
Starting
I've had people. I have a few now. People. Somebody asked me about Bocchino the other day, and I just was able to point them to that clip.
This is
there you go. There's Bocchino.
Thank you for doing this, Kevin. This is really nice.
Yeah, ton of work.
So it starts with barley, and it ends with
the original 8. Yeah, the original 8 was the making of the whiskey, and then we went in.
Just like
the Japanese is in there.
Oh yeah, there's a whole Japanese thing. You got barley, malting, milling, mashing, fermentation, distillation, barreling, bottling, bourbon.
Yeah.
That's the first 9. Number 10 is Japanese, then Irish, then Canadian. This is great. And then you go to individual picks. Really, really nice. Thank you, Kevin, for doing that. And of course, while you're at youtube.com/twit, you'll also see that we have a live stream of the shows as we're like now recording them. So people want to watch live, club member or not, you can do it. Of course, club members get to watch before and after the shows. They get a lot of other benefits as well. So thank you to our club members because they really support this.